Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Day 2 of the Reimagining the Rural West Initiative virtual workshop. We're so thrilled to have you all joining us this morning, and we're excited for our panels today. I'm just going to go over a couple of housekeeping items if you weren't with us yesterday, so that you know what's going on. First, all of these sessions are being recorded and will be available online afterwards, so if you missed yesterday's, you can catch up on them when they're posted, and today's will be posted as well. Second, we encourage you all to participate as much as possible. We wish we could be in person, but we'll make the best of being virtual instead. So you'll notice on the left side of your screen, there's an option to toggle between attendees and chat. If you go to chat, you can submit questions to us, and we'll pass them on and ask them of the presenters. So any questions you have, go ahead and send those to me or to the chat, and I'll make sure that they get asked during the panels. Other than that, you are all muted, unfortunately, so don't worry about what's going on at your houses. And we'll do the best that we can. So here is Kevin to introduce the panel.
Great, thanks, Lauren. So our first panel of the day is on broadband collaboration, and this panel is going to explore how communities are assembling broad coalitions to work toward the shared goal of broadband access. So through the initiative, WGA has taken a deep dive on broadband connectivity issues. We've examined how broadband can lead to innovations in agriculture, distance work and learning, telehealth, and other sectors in the rural West. We've also explored niche policy issues related to data and mapping, connectivity strategies for tribal communities, and programs supporting broadband build-outs to schools, libraries, and hospitals. I'm looking forward to this panel because it will help us explore how rural communities actually plan and execute successful broadband infrastructure projects. Joining us today to provide valuable on-the-ground perspectives are two panelists. We unfortunately had two people drop off because of the coronavirus situation, so we're really grateful that Russ and Carrie are still able to join us. So Russ is the director of the Washington State Broadband Office, and he is very familiar with WGA's member states, having previously served as the state broadband manager in Wyoming, and also as president of Brainstorm Internet in Western Colorado. Russ joined the Washington State Broadband Office after it was established by the state legislature in April 2019. And then Carrie Pipinich is the senior project manager for the Mid-Columbia Economic Development District. She served as the lead staff for the Wasco County Economic Development Commission and also the Sherman County Economic Development Office. In addition to working with communities and businesses throughout the region to support improved broadband access and utilization through the Columbia Gorge Broadband Consortium. For opening remarks, we'll start with Russ and then go to Carrie.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me here. I'm honored to be able to be here virtually with you all. I was certainly hoping to be live with everyone there in the beautiful part of Northern Oregon, but this will have to do given the current situation. But thank you for letting me come here and speak and share a little bit about what's going on here in Washington State, where we've had a lot of very good momentum prior to my arrival with efforts from Washington State University's group, led by Monica Babine and her team, and some other efforts internally with the governor's office. But as was said, I came from Colorado, where I've got a little bit of a unique background. I had a CLEC for about 15 years down there. Grew that to be about 14,000 customers and served a number of anchor institutions throughout the western part of Colorado and northern New Mexico. Worked with a number of tribal entities down there and bringing compelling services to some of those that were less fortunate, and really built networks into some deep rural markets, where we had a tower at 13,500 feet, in a couple of places. So understand the game pretty well, and having been a CLEC and co-located facilities in some of the incumbents, understand that. I also understand quite intimately the challenges of public monies against private investment. And we had a big BTOP plan happen in Colorado during my tenure down there, and it was a very challenging time, but we certainly made good things happen from that. And from there, I went on to be selected by the governor of Wyoming to come up and head up a broadband office there, which I think we were all kind of, okay, what does this mean? And it was interesting to be in a state like Wyoming where they really did have a lot of leniency in allowing me to, hey, go and make something happen, do good work, and see what we can do. And given that and some very good legislation they had there in place prior to my arrival, I was able to get some things done rather quickly. We stood up a broadband plan with the help of an advisory board that was in place by legislation, and in about 32 days, we ended up standing up a very good grant program up there within the first few months, and stood up a very compelling mapping gap analysis program that proved to be very fruitful for that state, in that it was instrumental in us receiving the one and only Reconnect grant that happened in the state of in Wyoming in an area that was considered served by the 477 map. So that was a very fortunate deal because we were able to challenge the data on that. From there, I was recruited by the governor of Washington to come and do the same thing here, and so I've been here now about 4 months, working through some of the challenges of the legislation, the way it was set up here. So I'll be happy to talk more about some of the best practices and some of the challenging practices that go on when you're setting up these programs down the road. But that's the history here. Was we got Senate Bill 5511 that was stood up. 5511 included a $25 million grant loan program. It included the creation of a state broadband office, a director position, and asked for some rulemaking, some legislation, that kind of stuff, some policy stuff. So here we are trying to figure out exactly how this gets put together, because it was a little bit challenging in the wording and the thoughts that went into legislation, but it was all good intent, and we're doing good work up here. So that's me, and that's where we're at today, and I'll look forward to sharing more as we get into the questions.
Great, thanks, Russ. Carrie, can you go next?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I had, as with Russ, wished that we were able to be here in the Dalles together, but excited to be participating this way. I figure if the broadband panel can't make this one work, we've got a bigger issue. So just start with a little bit of background on me and MCED. Mid-Columbia Economic Development serves a bi-state region. We've got 5 pretty rural counties about an hour east of Portland along the Columbia River. Our 5-county region has about 86,000 residents spread over 7,000 square miles. So like many areas in the West, some of those pieces are creating some challenges around broadband access, some pretty challenging and diverse terrain with lots of rocks, canyons, and forests. And we have a very dispersed population. Our least populous county has about 2 people per square mile, and our communities can be have significant distances between them. With all these challenges, our region for a long time has included broadband as critical infrastructure for our communities and our local economy and our regional economic development strategy, which has allowed MCED to really focus on trying to help support addressing this issue. So there are a couple pieces we really focus on with our work around broadband and addressing the digital divide in our region, looking at opportunities to improve access, and have been working for many years with WSU Extension in our Washington counties as they've developed and refined models to support local activity to improve broadband. So looking at understanding the resources that are available in the community around critical infrastructure for broadband, as well as how our community members and anchor institutions are trying to use that connectivity when it is there. We also, as we're looking at addressing some of this, seek to partner with our ISPs and our communities and bring them together a couple times a year through the Gorge Broadband Consortium to really talk about funding opportunities that are available, planning at the community levels, and get updates from our ISPs on where they're making investments to try to move the needle on some of this. We really do that collaboration and that community engagement is critical for identifying the kinds of local solutions that are going to work in each of our communities. And even just in our region, there's a very diverse look at how to address that, whether it's looking at publicly owned infrastructure that partners with local providers to provide that service to the end users, or public support for private networks in return for requirements around pricing and speeds that have to be provided. And we also, I don't want to shortchange how critical utilization and adoption is. This is critical infrastructure for our education system, our healthcare, our local businesses, and ensuring that our communities understand how to take advantage of that is really critical to the community-wide benefits that we want to see from broadband infrastructure itself. To do that, we with businesses, to do small business development center and local chambers to do trainings where businesses can learn from each other, as well as experts we can bring in. And then working with local partners like the libraries and nonprofits to support resident-focused training as well. So we've been busy here and looking forward to the conversation about broadband across the West.
Great, thanks, Carrie. And I think you raised a really good point about the fact that, COVID-19 right now has really elevated the importance of broadband connectivity, and the fact that we're moving so much of our business and our social interactions online at the moment. So I think that's a good place to start the conversation, especially because the COVID outbreak has been especially prevalent in the Pacific Northwest. So can you all describe maybe, some of the connectivity strategies or efforts that are, currently underway in response to COVID, whether it's related to distance learning for schools or other, kind of critical community institutions that may need broadband at this challenging time?
Sure, I could lead off again. Happy to, Kevin and Carrie.
Go for it, Russ.
Yeah, great. Everyone here in the state of Washington is learning from home and working from home. As you know, the universities have gone to online education. The schools have all said we're going to do home-based learning. All of us professionals are at home now working. And what it's done more than anything, and I'm singing to the choir here, I would imagine, is really shine a light on what's critical infrastructure now. I wrote an op-ed with the director of our commerce department up here and our governor that highlights the fact that once people aren't on the roads and aren't in the schools and libraries, what's the most critical infrastructure that's around? And I think it really shines a light that broadband needs to be kept in the forefront of our discussions. Too often it gets lost in the fact that many towns are very well connected. Many other areas are not, and so it becomes just a rural problem. So what this has done more than anything is it shines the light on the critical nature of this as a infrastructure that we need to focus on full time. So here in the state of Washington, we certainly have a short-term game going on. That's how do we get everybody connected that needs to be connected? We're working closely with our library, our state librarian, and again with the Washington State Extension offices that we're trying to make certain that those that have been part of this even before the COVID-19 are more active than ever now, trying to help ensure that folks have access to access. And it's really shining a light also on the digital equity and inclusion discussion, which has become a hot commodity and topic here recently, where we start to talk about affordability, we start to talk about the skills to use it, we start to talk about the tools to use it. So we're in heavy discussions here with our state libraries to try to figure out is that a place that we can do distribution? They've normally been the distribution hub for that. Are we encouraging people to gather in those places because they're coming to get their equipment to access online learning and work? So we're having some ongoing conversations around how we're going to get around that and mitigate that with some creative ideas that are going on here with regard to drop-off spots and those types of things. But that's an ongoing discussion. And again, what I'm trying to do is make certain that we don't lose sight of the fact that this is certainly something that will pass. And I want to make certain that broadband keeps its level of urgency high because this is not a last time something like this is going to happen. So I want to make certain that we're all in awareness that this is everybody's challenge, not just a rural challenge. We all need to stay focused on it. But currently, it's all hands on deck to try to see that what we can do to get some short-term solutions out in the field. And some of the bigger challenges right now that are unthought of challenges coming into this, access to equipment because the supply chains are drying up, access to gloves and masks for installers, those types of things. So I'm finding myself rallying on behalf of providers to try to figure out if we can't go to the Department of Health to get them the tools they need to be successful in helping us with these short-term goals. So lots of interesting things, but it's ever changing. It's a dynamic learning experience for us all, and certainly, again, I hope it's something that we continue to focus on the short term, but also remember that this is an everybody long-term game.
Well, and
Great, thanks, Russ.
I would echo
Go for it, Carrie.
that this situation and everybody moving to these online platforms to do work and be connected with friends and relatives and access educational resources is really highlighting what happens in communities that don't have that. We've been fortunate enough to see the needle move in some of our region, and some of our regions still got some really big connectivity challenges. So I think this is highlighting the places where we still have big gaps, and it's bringing it to everyday conversation. Having discussions with teacher friends here in town, thinking about how they can support their students as they go through this, and with the school shut down for extended periods, and they know, and they already see that some of their students don't have connectivity at home, whether it's because they can't afford it or it's not available, and then looking at the equipment they need to utilize it. So I think it's highlighting the haves and the have-nots around broadband pretty significantly, and I hope, as Russ said, that we're able to think creatively at our state and local levels about how we can address the situation as the what's going on the ground is changing, with our tools that we've got, and hopefully some additional flexibility from our state and federal partners to get resources out to address it in the short term while building towards those longer term solutions.
Great, thanks, Carrie. And yeah, I definitely agree. I think, hopefully this unfortunate situation just does help to continue to promote the importance of broadband deployment, especially in rural areas, and kind of our collective policy efforts. And I think, in particular, conversations surrounding the homework gap, the fact that a lot of students, particularly in rural and low-income areas, they may receive online homework assignments during the school day and have connectivity at school, but then when they go home, they don't have the ability to fill out those assignments, which I think that's kind of a good place to rally support in terms of policy and action. And I think hopefully, maybe one silver lining of this current situation is that we can get some more concerted momentum on broadband deployment. I want to change gears a little bit, Russ, to something you mentioned earlier, just given the fact that, you've worked across the West in terms of broadband deployment in both the private sector with states and governors. And so do you want to share maybe some, best practices or, strategies that you've deployed throughout, your career in the broadband space, and maybe some helpful information for other states or communities that are struggling with gaining access to the internet?
I'm happy to do that. And Kevin, I got a question for you. We do have one question in the messages. Are we to address those as we're going along, or do we address those at the end?
I'll sprinkle them in throughout. I think we'll circle back to that one because I think it's a really useful one.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, let me absolutely. Vicariously, I've fallen into this role as a state broadband guy. Just by happen, it wasn't on purpose. But what has worked really well, and then I'll talk about the others. Is that I do have a background in the industry, so I come in with some knowledge of what it is to build networks. I come in with some knowledge about the costs the financial modeling of running an ISP or a CLEC. Understanding the voice components, the fiber components, the copper components, the wireless components, what you can and can't do, and so that's been a good knowledge base to have when you come into a state and start to have the discussions around, well, now we have taxpayer dollars in the game, versus a policy person who would get here and have great intention would start to develop a program or programs around what they think is best, where I can sit here and say, well, those might have good intention on the policy side, but they're certainly not going to be very well received by the private sector and the private investment that's there. Things that worked well when I was in Wyoming, and when you talk about rural, Wyoming, and I see my buddy Brett Hess is on. He's a Wyoming fella. When I was in Wyoming, one of the things I really appreciated about Wyoming is they were really progress orientated, not process driven. And so, here we were in a state that was very, very rural, the most rural state in the country. And my platform was always, if we can solve the problem in this state, we've solved it for everybody else in the country. So it was really a drive to try to see what we could do for these very deep rural communities. And the state government there was very much embracing, Russ, just tell us what we can do and how to do it. And so what I found myself doing is working a lot with some of the providers that were willing to get out there and do what's best for the community. And when you find a few of those key players that are there saying, look, we'll come in, we'll throw a little sweat in this game, and at the same time, if you can, as the state, throw us a little bit of help on the economic side, this makes great sense. So finding those partners that are willing to do what they can do, and I'll call one out. There was a couple in Wyoming, Visionary Networks. Brian Worthen was amazing to work with there. He was all over the state. What can I do? How can I help? That's huge when you find those partners versus the partners that are sitting there saying, well, not me. I got to protect my investment. I'm going to really just take care of my own. This is an everybody ball game, and you need to find those people that are willing to take some risks and work in collaboration in the public-private way. And the other thing that worked really well in Wyoming was they legislated a broadband advisory council. To think one person can come in and make the decisions for the state is a little bit far-fetched. It's probably not well thought out. When I came here to Washington State, there is not that such body, and so it's been a challenge for me because I'm trying to figure out how to put said body together so that I can have folks around me that can share their knowledge, share their all their experiences in the industry, whether that's in education, that's in healthcare, whether that's in agriculture, all the different aspects, tribes. I mean, you should have all of those people at the table when you're sitting here trying to set policy and make decisions. It can't be led by industry. This is a community up. Both Wyoming and Washington came to that conclusion separately. They've done a great job here in Washington State doing a community-led effort called Broadband Action Teams. The state of Washington right now is working with Washington State University. That was their baby. We're trying to bring that to fruition as a standard in the state. In Wyoming, we did the same thing. It was called, broadband empowerment plans for communities, and it's all about those communities taking the lead. So, best practices. It's a community-led effort now. Communities need to get excited. They need to be able to define it and quantify it so you can make decisions. States need to be there as organizers of bodies and make certain that we continue to be the technical assist in helping these communities have success while they're looking for that that better connectivity. So hopefully that's some of the things. I'll share more as I think about them as we're going along.
Perfect. Thanks, Russ. That was a great response. And I think that a lot of our governors are obviously wrestling with some of those questions of how to organize. They're thinking about where to put broadband dollars in the state and how the state interactions, overlap with private investment. I think obviously Wyoming and Washington are a good dichotomy of, rurality in certain parts of the state. And so I think that bottom-up approach you were discussing really makes a lot of sense. So, Russ, you mentioned one item that I want to flip to Carrie for with the broadband action teams. So, Carrie, I just want to hear from you if you could elaborate a little bit about how your organization worked with through the Broadband Action Team model, and then also with WSU Cooperative Extension.
Yeah, so we've been working through this sort of local planning and engagement around quantifying that need, and then communicating it to ISPs and funders about how to address the situation for a long time. We worked closely with WSU Extension and Monica Babine, almost 10 years ago, when they didn't have as cool of a BAT acronym. We were calling them local technology planning teams. And I appreciate the shift towards the action model, thinking about how you really move those solutions you can identify forward. But it was a really great opportunity to bring local partners from a variety of sectors: healthcare, education, the libraries, local businesses, local community leaders, together with ISPs to talk about connectivity needs, the why our communities want to see that investment, and be able to work towards identifying solutions collaboratively. And that, through that effort, we have been using surveys and tools that were developed at that time to continue to support our work moving forward. And we actually had a really cool experience working with Monica and WSU, and through support from that iteration of the Washington State Broadband Office, through some RF resources to do that planning with a very grassroots approach on the Oregon side, or in the Washington side, and then also supported with a local partner in Wasco County, Q-Life, through Oregon's Broadband Advisory Council and planning efforts for Wasco County, leveraging some outside expertise and bringing together groups of stakeholders to really talk about the same challenges and issues and interests, to be able to quantify those for Wasco County in Oregon as well, and have been drawing on the planning efforts and the local networks that were built from both of those projects to continue that regional conversation through the Gorge Broadband Consortium that's still looking at similar questions and in terms of how are we quantifying that demand in each of our communities that still have a need, and being able to communicate that up to potential funders and with our ISPs. And that framework, I think, allows folks to identify the solutions that make sense for their communities, because I think when you look at broadband work, you really truly do see that everywhere the solution is going to look at a little bit different based on which partners want to come to the table, what resources are available when a project is trying to be pulled together, and which of those local ISPs or communities are willing to step up and take the lead.
Great, thanks, Carrie. Russ, do you have anything to add on that front?
No, I think Carrie did a great job of summarizing that, but I think in the end there, those partners, looking for collaborative partners is critical, and especially right now. When you think about the fact that we need to get something turned around in a matter of days, not months, not 6 months, not a year, but days. You need to have that, posse of folks that are willing to act and partner, and people that are willing to do what's necessary to get things done. And the hard ask right now is, when you keep America connected from the FCC side, the hard ask is, forgive late pays, forgive past dues, those kind of things. As a person that was in that industry, if I had to go for a number of months, not that many, without collecting my monthly income, I would have probably lost the company pretty quickly. So it's a challenging time, but you need those partners that are willing to take the risks and partner with you and trust the process that you're going to do what's right and work for the best of the citizen. I always say when I'm talking, that if the vision is the loudest voice in the room, everybody will win. right? It's not my personal agenda or my private agenda or my corporate agenda. If the vision is the loudest voice in the room, and if the vision is, let's take care of the people of the state, let's take care of the businesses of the state, the majority of them. If that's the vision, it's hard not to have a success.
Great, thanks, Russ. I think that vision comment is really fitting. And then I think just generally from your comments, I know that we have a number of folks involved with cooperative extension on the phone. I think it'd be worth exploring if that's potentially a body or network that could be active in other western states in terms of broadband planning and deployment. I want to switch to one question from the audience right now. Someone made a comment of just don't forget that a lot of us listening are, in a rural community on the, not in the town center. And I think that it's easy to think about and incentivize how to get broadband to, health centers and businesses and that sort of thing in the town, proper. But can you all share maybe some strategies in, either the region you're in or statewide in either Washington or Wyoming, Russ, that you've employed to, maybe something creative or low cost to try to get broadband connectivity away from the town center and out into the areas where people are living?
I'll tell you right now, I've got one that I've not been successful implementing, but I'm gonna go to my grave fighting for it. And that is, we as states and the federal government, we continue to pay for these fat pipes out to schools and libraries and anchor institutions and communities, and we think we're doing the world a great service. And it's the unintended consequences of good intention. When we as a state network go out and grab a school and pay a healthy sum of a 3 to 5 year contract, recurring revenue to a provider, and then allow them to walk away with just that in their pocket, we have done a huge disservice to our rural communities. So we as state government need, and I think the federal government too, we need to really take another look at that and say, okay, if we're going to go and give a provider a healthy amount of money for a guaranteed long term, we need that provider to also tell us how they're going to also bring out broadband to the more rural parts around that anchor institution. So if we are going to allow somebody to bring a fiber, and we're going to pay for them to bring the fiber in and then pay them 3 to 5 years monthly to have a fiber connection into a rural school, and we don't have them do more of a rural build out on that, we have just hurt the economic model for anybody else to come in and provide service to that rural community. So we as states must start thinking about that in a more focused way. And I'm working on some policy with our K-20 network here, who is the one that funds and helps the E-rate providers. And Wyoming has the similar network out there. And we need to be a lot more aware of what's going on. The anchor institution drives the business, drives the desire. When I was building networks in Western Colorado, the only way I would build out to the rural folks in that area is if I had the city, the town, the hospital, the school, the library. If I got them, I would then build off of that out into the more rural reaches. If they weren't available, I pretty much would go past that town because it just did not make sense for me to roll a truck and put up any infrastructure. So we have to have better forethought around when we go out and do what we feel is best for the communities. Also remember that sometimes can be a detriment. So that's the big one. I'll stop with that one. Let Carrie respond because I really believe that's a very, very important one we need to really consider going forward.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with that. Thinking about ways, I think we've been lucky in our region to have the education service district that serves a lot of our schools on the Oregon side really at the table. They attend the broadband consortium meetings fairly regularly, and knowing when there's a community rallying around connectivity, supporting, leveraging their needs, and hopefully that's bringing a provider to the table to participate in some of those broader conversations. But I think making sure that's institutionalized in a little bit better fashion could have a huge impact on connectivity in our smaller areas. But I think we are struggling truly to figure out to put the puzzle pieces together for those areas that don't have that anchor institution, that really truly are, very small communities with a cluster of homes, or farmers and ranchers. We have a lot of dry land crop production in our region where farms are thousands of acres, and trying to identify how we serve those folks, especially when a lot of them, with the kind of wind patterns we have, are building their homes in canyons to protect and shelter them. So we've seen one of our counties actually leveraged some investment in their public safety communications towers to support broadband deployment through a wireless network. And we're in the process of looking at how to improve that to support those folks longer term. But I think thinking about some of those different uses that you can bring to the table to sit down together and try to put that very challenging business case together and figure out what sort of public support and engagement needs to happen to improve that. I think we haven't seen it firsthand in our neck of the woods, but I've been incredibly impressed with some of our electric co-ops in the state and across the West coming to the table to talk about how they support connectivity for their communities, whether it's them acting as the ISP or others. And I think they're an incredibly important partner that folks across Oregon and Washington and around the West are trying to have conversations with, and I think are making some good progress in places. And I think thinking about all those different, like I said, puzzle pieces, I think that's my big takeaway from working on this stuff for about 10 years, is really thinking about how you fit all those different use cases and funding resources together and knit together a solution that's going to work for each community. And it's one, I think this is a good discussion because I think I come from a very different perspective from Russ. I have a local government, community engagement, and organizing background. And so that's sort of thinking about it from both the bottom up and how the states can support, I think, is a really good conversation, and how those two things have to come together to solve this problem.
Great, thanks, Carrie. And I definitely agree on that local and state perspective combo. I think this conversation is going really well, and I do want to highlight the fact that you all raised two issues that WJ is going to be highlighting in the coming days. So, Carrie, you mentioned the aspect of the electric co-ops and some build-outs in Oregon and Washington. And so actually on Monday, we're going to be hosting another broadband webinar looking at how electric and telephone cooperatives are deploying broadband networks across the West. And so we're really excited for that. I know that Lauren is going to post the link at the end of the conversation. And then, Russ, you talked about the fact that a lot of federal funding pots, drive fiber, other aspects of broadband infrastructure to schools, libraries, hospitals, et cetera. We'd previously had an Anchor Institutions webinar scheduled for this Tuesday, but we pushed that back just because a lot of those folks were involved in deploying networks and digital learning services related to COVID. And so that one is now scheduled for April 15th, and we're going to be looking at, how do we get the fiber to that Anchor institution, but then encourage deployment into the surrounding community. So we're really excited for those conversations and maybe to identify some action strategies. So with that, like I said, Lauren will post that information. And then, Carrie, I want to come back to you for a question about how the Mid-Columbia Economic Development District thought about some of the different technologies and how they might work in the region. Obviously, certain technologies like fiber optic cable are really expensive, but they offer really great speeds and reliability versus other technologies. They might be cheaper, but the speeds aren't as great and they might not be as reliable, or they might have a lot of lag time. So could you just talk about, how your organization and some of the businesses in the area thought about those different connectivity options and what investments you made?
Yeah, so we generally speaking, try to stay technology neutral in a lot of our efforts, looking at sort of what the solution is going to provide and identifying that in partner with our private providers and anchor institutions, thinking about what those characteristics they're looking for in that infrastructure to support them long term. So thinking about solutions that are scalable as we move forward into the future and reliable, and prioritizing how we support that. I do not pretend to be a technology expert in terms of the ins and outs of the systems. I leave that to the folks who do that on a day-to-day basis. But I think thinking about those end goals for those users, I think, has really been driving where choices are being made in that investment. And I think the other thing that we really try to think about too is how we harden that infrastructure and what's going to make the most sense to do that. When we see wildfires and ice storms that can melt or bring down lines, so thinking about all of those things coming together into a decision about what technology is going to make the most sense. And I think that's a big challenge too when you think about a lot of communities that have members with fixed incomes, and then balancing the need to make that business case pencil when the revenues in smaller communities, even if everybody can afford to connect, are modest. So I think that's when we've seen a lot of investment in fiber in our area. I think because of some additional support from our state and federal partners, whether it's coming in through E-rates or some of the state broadband investments through the Regional Solutions Program in Oregon or through requests to the legislature. I think that's been the big focus. But I think in order to get to some of our really rural and remote areas, we're going to have to think about hybrid solutions that leverage those fiber backbones to get connectivity out. And as the technology for the wireless changes and continues to improve, hopefully that allows some more affordable solutions that are still meeting that scalable, reliable requirement that a lot of our communities and our businesses need to continue to use.
Great, thanks, Carrie. Russ, do you have anything to add on that front from maybe how the state of Washington or Wyoming have thought about some of those questions related to cost and reliability, et cetera?
I probably got too much to say on that, but let me just reiterate one of the things Carrie said, and that's being technology agnostic on how you get that last mile delivered. We have to be reasonable. You know, I'm driven in Washington with a Senate bill that is mandating 150 symmetrical to all citizens and businesses by 2028. Is that realistic? Probably not. But I'm driven by that, and that's what's mandated by legislation in this state. So what I've got to do is continue to look at how I can continue to drive the highest level of connectivity out the furthest I can. And we do, you know, I do know that wireless is a good product, and it continually exponentially changes every year to be a better product. You know, we keep our eye on some of the LEO and MEO satellite stuff that's coming down the pike. That may be a disruptive technology that'll come into this industry down the road. But ultimately, like Carrie said, fiber is the goal. I mean, we still don't know the finite. Fiber has a finite capacity right now. What changes, what changes the amount of bandwidth fiber can take are the hardware ends. We're upgrading hardware ends on fiber every year to get more and more throughput through fiber. We need to get that out as far as we can. And we need to quit funding programs nationally and statewide that don't build scalable infrastructure. And we can't say 10 years from now, we're still going to be paying for 25/3 networks. That just doesn't make sense. It's bad policy. It's bad policy by the feds. This RDOF decision now to go and start funding 25/3 for 10 years is not good policy. States shouldn't be doing that either. You know, we certainly looking at trying to get broadband out as far as we can and as economically as we can is great. But we need to talk about the use of that. We need to understand what we're going to be using it for in 5 years. We don't know the capacity we're going to need, so we need to get scalable networks out. And that's what we need to talk about, scalable networks. So I think people need to be a lot more attentive to not the speeds, but the scalability of whatever the technology is you're putting out there. And be agnostic, because there are technologies that are going to continue to change, and there are going to be disruptive technologies come to the table. But I'm all about the fact that be creative and get it out there to those folks that don't have it. Because I'm going to tell you right now that it's not people that don't have, because really most of us can have it. And if you really want to, the feds are funding satellite, so 99% of us all could have broadband based on what federal standards are right now. What we need to continue to focus on how we build the scalable networks that will be here for many years to come after we're gone. So we're doing legacy work, not work just to cover our hind ends for today.
Great, thanks, Russ. I want to highlight one kind of interesting case study that WJ saw at one of our previous workshops related to the wireless and hybrid solutions elements you and Carrie were discussing. So near Fargo, we had a presentation from a broadband provider there who's been laying fiber to the tops of grain elevators and then launching fixed wireless networks from the elevators to serve the agricultural and ranching communities in the area. And so that was kind of a cool blend of making a solid fiber investment to get somewhere and then searching for a creative low-cost solution to get connectivity out into the really rural areas. So we're definitely supportive of that kind of thinking. Russ, we did just have one clarifying question from the audience. What do you particularly mean by scalable networks?
Scalable are networks that allow you to continue to grow the broadband throughput as demand requires it. I used to build copper networks and fiber networks and wireless networks, and unfortunately, some infrastructure, i.e. copper, has a finite capacity. Now they're continuing to kind of try to get a little bit more, squeeze a little bit more out of that lemon, but for the most part, copper infrastructure is a tough infrastructure to continue to think will have scalable capability for years to come. They're currently getting at most 25 to 50. Some people are saying 100, but it's very distance sensitive. It degrades based on quality of wires in the ground. So we really have to continue to think about what is that infrastructure you're going to put in there that will allow us to continue to grow it to future needs. I used to talk about, again, here I talk too much, but I used to talk about when I coached kids soccer. I coached youth soccer, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds. We call it bumblebee soccer. And all the kids would go to where the soccer ball was. That was their game, right? They chase the soccer ball around and kick it amongst the scrum. Well, we learned really quickly that you took one of your kids out of there and you put it where you wanted the ball to be, which is going to be over by the opposing goal. So I'd have one kid just standing over there chasing butterflies while the scrum's running around with a ball, right? Well, eventually somebody's going to kick the ball out of the scrum over to that guy, and we're going to have an easy goal because we knew where we wanted the soccer ball to be. What we need to understand and start to educate people is where is that soccer ball going to be? What is holographic learning going to look like? What's telehealth going to actually look like? Are we going to be doing telesurgery at home? I mean, what are the things that are going to happen that are going to require bandwidth that we got to have networks that can capably handle that? So scalable means we can be doing the things that we need to be doing that we're not even imagining today.
Outstanding. Thanks, Russ. And I think I'll just add the point that, when you bring, broadband into an area, it encourages more demand. And so a lot of areas kind of see this exponential growth curve. And so that, I think, speaks to the importance of having that network be scalable so that you can support more businesses or schools or whatever may come in after you invest in that infrastructure. Russ, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to turn to the audience a little bit. So for folks' knowledge, the Federal Communications Commission is currently planning a $20 billion with a B auction called the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund to accelerate deployment in rural areas. So Russ, I'd just like to get your kind of perspective on how maybe states or governors could interact in that program and any recommendations you have regarding how it's designed and how it can maybe build on the efforts that are happening locally right now.
Well, you don't have enough time on this call for me to talk about my feelings on RDOF, but let me give you just kind of a summary of what I think should be happening. Currently, Chairman Pai took 16 of the 20, and he is going to go do a reverse auction. Anybody that's familiar with the reverse auction format that's been going on for the last decade or so, should be disappointed in the fact that that's the decision they're going to go with this time. Wyoming and Washington, the two states I'm most intimate with, were huge recipients of reverse auction funds, but that was for satellite technology. 66% of the people that were available to receive the last CAF2 reverse auction in the state of Washington received satellite as their standard of service. That is ludicrous. That's bad for Washington State. That is not scalable technology. That is technology that has latency issues. It will not be landline capable, and it's just not. It's, in my opinion, it's bad practice. We need to not be thinking about who the lowest bidder is when we award these funds out to folks to help us build these infrastructures in the rural areas. We need to start to think about who's going to do it best, who's got the capability of building the most scalable networks that we can continue to add on with our little bit of state funds. I would encourage us all to be. I wrote a letter to Chairman Pai, done from the state of Washington, that said, look, instead of you at the federal level sitting there trying to think that you can solve the problem at our very unique state level, allow the states block grants so that we can then go out and spend the money specifically in the areas we are intimately familiar with that need support. Right? Let us be the technicians here. You know, we're not. You don't go to the doctor when you have a serious injury and go to the cheapest doctor you can find to help you with, you know, the cure. You're looking for somebody that's got the most experience, somebody that can deliver something that you know will be a long-term solution for your problem. And unfortunately, reverse auction is bad business, and it's relying on bad data. They're still leveraging the 477 data. They're just trying to spend money right now versus actually spend it deliberately with good thought behind it. So I'm very concerned, and I'd love it if the governors of this country would get behind that in a bipartisan way, to where we say this is no longer a partisan issue about how quickly we can spend money and look good spending money. This is going to be more about we coming together and taking care of a basic human need of critical infrastructure to every person in this country. And let's put the partisan politics aside and let's really start to solve the problem. It's not that hard. You know, we just need the resources at the state level where we are the experts at defining, you know, what our states need.
Great, thanks, Russ. And I think the current situation and the need for well-invested bipartisan action is particularly fitting right now. We did have one question earlier on from the audience related to, is there a one-stop or two-stop resource for grants, loans, and other financial means to build up broadband infrastructure in remote areas? Do you all know of any good kind of convening websites for that sort of thing?
Carrie, I keep talking. I want you to make certain you have some chances to talk. But I in the state of Washington, you know what we've got a state grant program, a state grant loan program. We also leverage the USDA, which is a very strong supporter of rural connectivity. Those are the most frequently used ones. Other states, you have to look at, each state is unique. Colorado's got a very good broadband funding source there with their State Broadband Office. They use Department of Local Affairs and some other things, but I can't think of a national resource right now other than leveraging some of those federal partners. Kind of vague, and I can give more information offline if needed.
And I think NTIA has some really good information up on their Broadband USA website that's got a good catalog of the funding resources that are out there, as well as some of the tools that are available to do the planning piece that you really need to have in place to get to the grants and loans to build, especially in remote areas. You got to put together a good case for those kinds of projects when you're looking for resources, because they're expensive projects with a longer return. So I think that I would really encourage folks to think about those planning resources as well.
Hey, look there, we've got Monica Babine chiming in saying the same thing. And Monica, since you're out there, maybe you can put the link up to the NTIA funding resource guide. If you can, just throw it in that message bar there for folks. Oh, searching.
I was really just feeling Monica.
Great, thanks. And I'll also vouch for the utility of NTIA's resources. I think they're a good one-stop shop as well. And I will highlight an effort that one of the Western governors recently published. Governor Bullock in Montana, I think 1 or 2 months ago, they posted a really easy-to-use federal funding kind of encyclopedia for Montana. So if anyone from Montana is listening, search for that. It has a search bar where you could put in, broadband, and then have all of the federal broadband programs come up, or wastewater, other infrastructure needs like that. So encourage folks to take a look at that. And then I think we have time for just one more question, which I'm going to highlight from Brett Hess. And he makes the point that in the rural West, a lot of communities have agricultural experiment stations, which are related to the cooperative extension services network that we talked about before. And given the fact that those are, pretty high-end research facilities, a lot of those have pretty good broadband access. Do you all see any way that maybe policymakers or state programs could leverage those experiment stations to get connectivity to surrounding rural areas?
It's interesting you say that, and thanks, Brett, for the question. Monica and I were talking about this yesterday about, them being a bigger player in potentially this immediate need, where they've got good broadband, and we could either do better hotspot, builds off of that, or we can do point-to-point, multi-point stuff off of those. So we're in discussions right now with regard to our immediate needs, and maybe that'll turn into a more long-term discussion. But it's good. They're certainly tremendous partners.
And Oregon's been working on something leveraging university assets throughout the state to support increasing penetration for some of those bigger pipes. And I think the key to those conversations is really going to be something that Russ brought up earlier, is ensuring that you're not just thinking about how you connect to those places when you are exploring how you deploy that, but thinking about how that service can expand to the communities they're in. And I think that's one of the things that we all need to be thinking about as we look at these policy pieces, is how do we build in those conversations to the discussion to make sure that it's not getting lost when we're building these big pipes to specific locations in our rural communities, but how we leverage that to serve the community as a whole. And I know it's a very complex issue with a lot of politics around it in terms of who's bringing in that pipe and how that competes or doesn't with some of our local providers that are serving those rural communities. But I think having those conversations built in and having them early and often is really going to be critical to those deployments, supporting and encouraging improved connectivity for their communities.
Yeah, Kevin, to jump in on the back of that too, Carrie brings up a good point that, it is one thing to build a network, and it's gonna, there's 90% of the cost of a network is putting plow in the ground. Once the network's in, the second part that's really not on everybody's mind, but needs to be part of the discussion in the beginning, is maintaining and operating that network. When we go and we say we're going to build all these very rural areas, it's one thing to build there, but then it's something to roll a truck and continue to support those networks. So we do have to have that on our radar. And as governors of states, whether it's a universal service fund or what it is, but there's going to have to be some conversation around ongoing funds to ensure those networks maintain integrity. It's an interesting discussion, and that's, RDOF is kind of in place to do that. But currently, as it is, it'll be spent with the bigger players. I think if RDOF came again to the state level, we could set up some ongoing M&O funds that would allow for those that are willing to take the risk to build in those rural networks, also the opportunity to benefit from ongoing funds.
Great, thanks, Russ. I think that's a important aspect to consider, and I definitely welcome exploring with that concept with you further. I think that's about all the time we have. I really appreciate, Russ, your and Carrie's participation and thoughts, and I think we've generated a lot of really good information and ideas about how there can be more effective coordination between local, state, federal agencies, and also the business communities and rural areas surrounding those communities. So we'll leave it with that, and I also want to thank the audience for all the really good questions and inputs for this panel. I feel like it really helped the conversation flow well. So with that, we'll end the broadband conversation and take a 10-minute break before our discussion about agricultural trends in the West. Thanks, Russ and Carrie.
Thank you.
Thank you.